welcome everyone to a this month's edition of the Ribinar. We're delighted and honored to have Dr. Susan Kartiko here to speak with us today about how to negotiate and navigate the manuscript submission process. As many of you know or will know, that we are now enjoying a new relationship with the Journal of Trauma and Acute Care Surgery. It's become our journal of in some respects, and with that comes an added responsibility to submit and deliver quality manuscripts that are worthy of publication. And it's I commend the CWIS leadership, and specifically the publication committee and Ms. Whitbeck in developing processes and programs to really help our authors get ready and negotiate this process. So I think Susan's going to elucidate those for us today, and it's my pleasure. Susan is a assistant professor of surgery at George Washington University. She's a trauma surgeon there, trauma and critical care. She's a partner of Dr. Babak Sarani, who is our president-elect, known to most of you. Susan, take it away.
Thanks for the nice introduction, and Dr. White, and so everybody else, welcome to the Ribinar. And this is coming from a humble place of myself, because before being being part of the committee, the publication committee, and being the guest editor, it was very difficult to me to kind of navigate through manuscript submission. I had to learn the hard way, and that unfortunately sometimes resulted in my manuscript being rejected because I didn't follow some rules that kind of sometimes nebulous. So I'm going to try to kind of introduce these things to you guys so that you can learn from my mistakes, and I have the opportunity to be on the backside of this and looking at it from the other side. And so hopefully this will be helpful for all of you. So the title is just cheekily Manuscript Submission Tips for Success. I don't know if this is really going to be making your manuscript submission successful, but at least you can navigate a little bit more on that side, and I'll give you a little insight to what it feels on the other side, so that we all can have all the understanding on this. Let's see. Next slide. Okay. Disclosure-wise, some of the content I actually took from the presentation that Dr. Coimbra gives as the editor for Journal Trauma, and so there's tips and tricks in there that I put in there that I just really lifted off of his presentation. The agenda for today, we'll talk about JTAC submission, tips for the submission, and then tips for revision, because I think we talk a lot about how to submit or how to write a manuscript. We don't really talk much about how to revise your manuscript. Then we'll talk about TACO submission, which is another journal that we're working with together, so that now we have two big journals, pretty big journals, that we can submit our work to. We'll talk about deadlines a little bit later, and then another CWIS program to aid your submission in writing a paper. So when you submit for an abstract for CWIS, there are two types of submission that you can check. And Sarah Ann, please let me know if if this is still, the correct information. But there are two. One is podium, and then the other type of submission you can do is poster. If you are, we expect you to also submit a manuscript for JTACs if your work is picked up for the podium presentation. And so the new way of how we're going to do this is that once you are selected for a podium presentation, we expect you to write a manuscript, and then the manuscript will be submitted to a peer in CWIS prior to JTAC submission. And the reason for that is to make sure that, we can kind of see if there's a typo, then we can kind of help you with those. If there are, like sentences that runs together grammatically, or if there's like a jump in logical steps on like explanation to introduction or something like that, then it can be caught earlier on. So that when it goes into JTAGs, being submitted to JTAGs, the manuscript is quite clean, and that way the reviewer, who's also a member of CWIS, when they read it, they don't have to go through all the grammatical error and typos and stuff like that, which unfortunately happened in the past submission. Okay, so what is JTAGs? If you're in trauma, then you're pretty familiar with this journal. If you're in America, you're pretty familiar with this journal. However, if you're not, it's kind of like nebulous. Why JTAGs? The JTAGs is a premier journal of trauma, acute care, surgery related topics, and it is the journal for AAST, East, Western trauma, pediatric trauma, and Trauma Association of Canada, CWIS. We are the newest partner for JTAGs and ANSAS. And what it is that we are given a spot, like say for us in particular, CWIS is December. We are given a spot in December to publish all our chest wall related publications, which is kind of cool because they're all coming in like this one very nice edition. There are other papers in that edition too, but mostly they're all like, and then the top of it will say like CWIS submitted podium presentation, much like if you presented to East and your paper got into JTAGs. The impact factor is quite high for a specific journal, right? So this is specifically trauma surgery, and so the impact factor is 3.4, and all of us trauma surgeons wants to submit there. And then so say your abstract got accepted and you write a manuscript, again, the thing is, avoid grammatical errors, typos, let someone else read it before you submit it. Be concise, and then follow the format, quote unquote. I'll talk about that next. And then, like I said before, for this coming year, we're going to ask you to submit it a little bit earlier, so a CWIS member can also help with all these conciseness concerns or grammatical errors and typos, and make sure that the manuscript follow the format. The turnaround is pretty quick for that, so it does have to be a very, kind of done deal manuscript before you give it to the CWIS member to peer review. So this is the format, and I think we're going to have another webinar talking about how to write a paper, and I'll give you the information at the end of this presentation. But this is the format that I think I lifted this from Dr. Coimbra's presentation. So this is kind of what he wanted, and he's the editor, so kind of it behooves us to kind of follow what he wants. So one of the things that he wanted is that we should write in the style, tone, and convention of the journal. How do you know how to do that? Well, it's probably wise to pick up the JTAGs and kind of read a couple of articles just to see like how things are written and how things are kind of presented in the journal. He kind of like put emphasis on this. Writing is an art to communicate in clear, concise, and logical narrative. I don't think he's a fan of like meandering kind of ideas. So he just wants it like, I found this is what it means, and this is the limitation, and this is how you can use it in practice. So for abstract, for JTAGs, it's usually they ask for less than 300 words. You do not need to report all the findings, but if you are reporting a finding that has a statistical kind of findings to it, then you need to kind of report that. So you can't just say, oh, outcome is better. You want to say, well, the ICU length of stay is lower, and then in parentheses, 2 days versus 1 day, comma, p value, whatever. So those are kind of the standard way of reporting. And again, in abstract, you do not need to report everything, even though you have like 5 very significant finding. It is okay to only kind of list the first 2, like for example, your primary outcome and secondary outcome number 1, as opposed to reporting all of them. For the introduction, it's a pretty set that there are like about 4 or 5 paragraphs depending on the idea that you're trying to present. But introduction usually contains like, why is it important? If there's a knowledge gap, briefly how you will do the research, and then you want to list your specific aim and hypothesis. And if you notice when you're submitting for these, there's this like stroke requirement nowadays that we have to do, and then they will ask you specifically whether you put in your specific aim and hypothesis. So it behooves you to kind of write that down in the introduction instead of kind of like, well, we think that this is what happened, even like the specific aim is one, whatever, our hypothesis is certain things. So it's very clear and concise. On the method side, we want to put in the data source, the patient population, the outcome that you're looking into, and statistical analysis. If there's confounder, you're doing logistic regression, you want to say what are your confounder, what you're trying to achieve with the logistic regression. So those needs are all in the method section. The results, usually we want to say the patient characteristic is usually table 1. We want to talk the outcome results. And the thing to remember is avoid repeating all the results, especially if it's already in the tables and the figures. And so, it is, if you have a very intricate result, meaning like multiple subheading, it is okay to do subheading. It's actually encouraged to do subheading so we know where you're coming from or what you're talking about. So it's not like a long narrative. But also be mindful not to repeat everything. For example, table 1, there's really no need to mention all the comorbid, all the age and sex and, of the population that you're studying, if it doesn't really pay any relevance, right? And so that's kind of why the table 1 is there. The next one is discussion. And then this is also one of the things that I think a lot of us have a pitfall, including myself. We tend to kind of like talk a lot as if we're talking to our friends. But the format of the journal, what they want is brief summary of your finding. That's 1 paragraph. Again, not listing everything. Basically, just go back to your specific aim or, outcome number 1, outcome number 2, and your hypothesis, whether you find that it is, based on your research, whether it is proven or not. And then you want to summarize previous studies and how your findings relates to that, right? So if you are confirming other findings, say in a different population, then say so. If they are opposite, then explain why they are different, or maybe they did the research a little bit, study design a little bit differently. Also say like, maybe it's a difference in time, like in the old days we do this and nowadays we don't do this, but limit that to like 2 paragraphs. There's really no need to kind of like, talk more and more. The other thing that I noticed, sometimes we want to kind of explain all the different all the papers that talk about similar topic, and kind of almost write like a mini review. Try not to do that unless the papers actually have any like pertaining information that is related to yours. Just because they did similar thing doesn't mean that you have to put all of them in there. And then of course the paragraph that is important is the limitation, and you should write a paragraph. And there is no research study that has no limitation. So that's kind of like something that you just have to do. And this is what I, like in short, is the format. You can see from this alone, your manuscript should not be more than like, I don't know, 10 to 15 pages, right? So if I started going to like 30 pages or something like that, it's a little bit long. For what it's worth, the journal has to print. And so if it's super long, they're also not looking for that. They want something a little bit more concise, easy to digest. And so I think all research can be written in a concise way so that it's not super long, pages and pages and pages kind of thing. So that's a format. Any questions, concerns at this point? Okay, I'm going to move on. So, and then one of the things that I think is important to note is that when we submit to our manuscript to a journal, we need to follow the rules, and the rules are, we need to follow them verbatim. I think there are sometimes times that we're kind of like, oh, I should be okay, you know, kind of thing. But if there are too many of them, some of them are okay, right? Like I'm like, oh, okay, well, this and that, you can email the managing editor later on and kind of get clarification or whatever. But mostly you really should just follow the rules verbatim. It is difficult when your manuscript is a little bit different than other people's, because it's just, you know, we have to read a lot of these, like myself, the reviewer, Dr. Coimbra, everybody has to read a lot of these. And it's really difficult when you make us look for other things that are not in place. So there are author guidelines in the journal website. And for JTAGs, it's also conveniently in the editor manager site, which not every journal is like that. And the editorial manager site is where you submit for the manuscript. I'll show you in a little bit. And then this is, I'm also reminding everybody to fill out your strobe paperwork, the conflict of interest. If you touch, I don't know, I haven't talked to him recently about this, but last time I talked to him, he's not very keen of AI, the use of AI, ChatGPT, stuff like that. And then I think there are now disclosure to it. So if you do use it, you need to disclose it. You know, obviously, if you don't use it, then you just say no. And then the other thing that is one of the things that are important for our publication is that he does not want identifying markers like institutions and stuff like that, which is proves to be kind of difficult because we all kind of know, you know, who in the Netherlands is, you know, producing all these papers and stuff like that. And but he wants to make sure that we have a no bias type of review. And especially in these like organizational stuff, it is easy to know whose paper it's coming from. And so we really certainly do not want to make it any easier, right? And so that it is fair when we review them. Okay. All right, so this is where you find stuff. If you go to the website, you know, the Journal of Trauma and Acute Care Surgery, there is this like link in for authors, you can see there. And if you click that, it actually have a lot of information from the journal to the author. So, you know, submit a manuscript will take you to the editorial manager, but then there's also instruction for authors. You can read that outside of the editorial manager. There is also this language editing services, and I think that might be something that is useful, especially if all your team are not like American English speaker. I mean, like English speaker, I think also, I don't know, maybe not benefit from it because they can write pretty well already. But this is kind of like for the journal, so take it for what it's worth. It's there. The service is there if you want to use it. And then this is the actual editorial manager, and you can, you know, obviously log in the button that says login, and then that's where you do most of your manuscript submission. There is instruction for author for JTAGs again, and then your conflict of interest disclosure form is actually right there. Feel free to kind of root around the author tutorial and the reviewer tutorial. They're giving you quite a bit of information on those as well. That's that. So once you submit it, and then, you know, we review them. So once you give it to the CWIS peer reviewer, and then they say, oh, it's all good, or you did the revision, and then you submitted it to JTAGs. After you guys submitted the JTAGs, then you have 2 reviewers that will look into your papers. And then these 2 reviewers, you know, kind of send their reviews back, usually to me or to the JTAG CWIS editor, guest editor. And we read their, you know, their reviews. And sometimes they say, well, you know, the statistic is really, really rough. I don't really quite understand it, but maybe someone else should review it. And so what I can do at that point is actually sending it to a statistician reviewer that is part of JTAGs. And so don't be alarmed about that. That's one of the things that we can do as well. And then they review it, and then it'll go back to the authors, whatever it is, you know. So sometimes you'll get 2 reviews, sometimes you get 3 reviews. It's all just the background kind of work that we have to do to get your paper, you know, hopefully accepted. So there you go. You're not rejected. So yay, but then revision comes. And so I find revision very stressful. And so I wanted to kind of like demystify it a little bit and kind of help everybody else who's here to kind of know what it is all about. So sometimes it feels like judging is how I felt, sometimes I'm like, they get the revision, like the reviewer 1, reviewer 2, and they're all kind of like, oh, this sucked, this sucked, this sucked. That's in my head. It's also, it's not really how it is because, the reviewers actually, especially for CWIS, once your paper published, it makes all of us looks good. So their reviews are is pretty pure of heart. They want you to be successful. They want to make sure that the journal accept it. And obviously, you can't publish something that is not, well written. And so that's where their expertise comes from. When you are revising, I would suggest you to follow the instruction verbatim. Don't just scan the questions and then answer haphazardly because it will result in a second revision. Sometimes everybody notices when you don't answer something. And this is not me. I'm just talking about the reviewers because it will go to the same reviewers after you review the manuscript. After you revise the manuscript, that revision goes to the same reviewer unless they decline. And even when there's a new reviewer, they will look at the previous reviews and look at your revision and see if you answer everything. So be sure to answer all the questions the reviewer has. I would suggest you to be very respectful and polite. The reviewers volunteer their precious time to help you get published, like I said before. They mostly got nothing out of this. But if you are a reviewer, you do get something out of it. So I will tell you right now. So JTAGs give you like credit, CME credit to do a review, especially, if you are doing it within the deadline. If you're doing it past the deadline, then you do not get that credit. And then the other thing is like, it's one of those things that is kind of prestigious to be a reviewer for JTAG. So, but those are it really. And so, we all try to help everybody else to get published. And so be nice to us. It's also better if you make it easier for the reviewer to go back and read your responses. So meaning that you should include their questions in your response. So I'll give you an example very quickly. How do we respond to a reviewer? So you basically have to write another letter to editor, with the same like your institution and all that stuff. Dear editor, and then respond the questions that the reviewer gave in bullet point with the answer clearly marked. So you can do it like this: number 1, question, and then you put in response and then answer in different fonts. And number 2, question, and then answer, same thing. Sometimes reviewer may ask multiple questions in one bullet, or they kind of have like this run of things that and another thing. You should answer all these questions, like, even though they feel like they run together, just answer each one of them, or kind of, if it makes sense, into like one, like this and that. And so you kind of put it together. I'm like, okay, this and that. And so you answer the question in there. I want you to be careful to actually answer each one of the questions, because sometimes people kind of like, oh, it's so long, they lose track of what they're supposed to be answering. Just go back and review it before you send it in, before you submit it again. Malignant compliance will put you in a disadvantage. I think some people, you can tell that they're angry when they write it back, like write the revision back, and you're like, okay, I'm sorry that you're offended, but it's still a valid question. Okay, so this is just an example of mine, and this is not even going to JTAGs, but this is an example of mine. So what I did, and this is pretty much what a lot of people use, this format. And so you put in your information here and you say, dear editor-in-chief, dear Dr. So-and-so, thank you for the review of the manuscript. And you put the title, you put the manuscript number. We appreciate the question comments made by the peer reviewer. and we have addressed a comment, and then you put in reviewer 1, and then you just copy and paste what they wrote, reviewer 1. And this one in particular said that it was fine. So I said, thank you. And then reviewer 2 has more questions on that. And so this one in particular, I think, oh no, it just has that one question. But, you know, like there's a big distinction between what the reviewers say and then the response, and then, you know, put in and analyze. However you want to do it. You can analyze, you can like underline it, whatever you'd like to do. Oh yeah, in this one in particular, I split the method question into 2 because he did ask them in multiple parts. So I put in here and I responded, and there's another question and I responded, and at the next page I didn't put the next page. So that's an example of it. You do not have to do this like exactly the same, but this is kind of like what most people do, like plus minus the, you know, analyze or have underline or something like that. Okay. I want to address this like thing where reviewer 2 is like sometimes the one who just kind of like keep asking questions, and you're just kind of like, oh my God, why are you criticizing me so much? So reviewer 2 has a bad rap, but it doesn't mean anything. I think for us in particular, I didn't really assign people like reviewer 1, reviewer 2. It could be anybody, but it's just the name reviewer 2 sometimes makes people like crazy. But, you know, the point is this: sometimes you don't agree with the reviewer's critique. If you don't agree, I would suggest you not to answer right away. Just go to bed, read it again in a couple of days when you're calm down. And then I want you to put yourself in your reader's position and reread their suggestion. Because sometimes it is just the way that the sentence is written and read. You know, sometimes it's not necessarily very clear what they're trying to get, you know, across. And so kind of rereading it in a different mindset can kind of like elucidate what the reviewer actually wants out of you. So, and what, you know, what the thing that kind of always saves me is like, if one person asks the question, other people will ask the same questions. So, you know, might as well revise it now rather than having multiple people. Like they can also write a letter to the editor saying your paper sucks, right? Like, so that's also a thing to do. So, you know, one of the things I think I lift this as well from Dr. Coimbra's presentation is that don't leave your message to the reader's interpretation. Also, do not overstate your finding, and you need to master your message. So the way you write your message should be one that is concise and clean and understandable by most people. Any question about that? I want to pause here and see if there's any concern from anybody. Good. Okay. And then some more tips. Nobody got accepted the first go around. It's very, very rare. Most will need revision. So don't be discouraged when you get these revision requests. It's actually a good thing because the alternative is just flat out rejection or flat out like acceptance, but that's very rare. The reviewers are actually on your side and want to make your paper better. And so all these questions are things that other people would have asked the questions. And also the reviewer is like the one that asked the question first, because eventually some editor, either myself or Dr. Coimbra, will ask the question. So I'm not the end all and be all by any means. I do talk to him quite a bit. And then even if I accepted a paper, he will read it. And then he has the final power to accept or to reject it. And so that's kind of where it's at. And then rejection is really not the end of the line for your work. Most people submit somewhere else. And so don't be discouraged about that. Which also a good segue to the fact that we are also working with SACO. SACO is an open access AASC publication, also very prestigious, especially considering that it's an open access platform. It publishes paper for trauma and surgically critically ill, the care of them. And the impact factor is 2. JTAX is 3.4, SACO is 2, not that far behind at all. So it's a very good journal. And they're a little bit more open with the type of things that they publish as well. And so for TACO, the only thing is that it costs money to publish. However, CWIS is collaborating with TACO as well. So we are able to sponsor manuscripts. I think for this year, we're able to sponsor 4 manuscript, and next year maybe 5, something like that. So the way it works is that we will, when you submit for CWIS, and then you submit and then it got picked up for podium, you got a manuscript ready, it will go to JTAX first, and then we'll see how it goes with JTAX. And then if you are rejected on JTAX, we will, the CWIS team will take a look at the 4 or 5 best ones, and then we can give sponsorship to submit to SACO. So that's kind of new this year, I think, and exciting. So that's that. If you have any questions before we go to the next section. Very cool. Okay, next one. This is a CWIS publication timeline for 2024. Dr. White, go ahead.
I just wanted you to clarify for us what you meant by sponsorship. Does that mean CWIS will underwrite the cost, or have we negotiated a price with SACO for those 4 papers, and then anything above and beyond that is the responsibility of the submitter? Can you clarify that, please?
Yeah, I think that's how it is. I am actually not very clear, so maybe you do know more about this than me. But my understanding is they're like about 4. We are able to fund the submission costs for 4 papers. Now I don't know if it's like all of it, or is there like a discounted price, but the actual number of amount of money, I don't know. Do you know, or Sarah?
I'll bet you there's somebody on this call that knows that, Sarah. And
I do know. Thanks for the lead in. Yes, so for this year, there are 4 fully funded spots, or 4 fully funded SACO publications available for things that came out in the 2023 summit, and there will be at least 5 for the 2024 summit, potentially even more. We're working on negotiating the rate with SACO right now, and there is a negotiated discounted rate for CWIS members for other things you want to submit to SACO as well. So if you want to submit something that's not part of the summit, if you finish a project, it's not something you present at the summit, but you want to just submit it and have it, at an off-cycle time, there is a discounted rate for CWIS members as well.
sounds like a benefit of membership to me.
It is. Good job, you.
BOM.
Thank you. So that's good. That's good. So for this 2023 is already, that's the 4 spot, and then 2024 we have 5 spots. So that's great. This is the timeline for 2024. Dr. Mayberry will provide a webinar or Ribinar regarding crafting your best paper, and that'll be in fall 2023. I'll give you the exact date on the next slide. And then and this is the rest of the timeline, but the one that pertains to, I think, for the publication type stuff would be November 1st for a scientific abstract. It is due. Notification will be sent out on December 15, and then the next deadline will be February 20th. So everything is a quick time turnaround. So I would suggest you have a project that you are thinking of sending it for CWIS next year. By all means, maybe start writing. Because obviously we can all write the introduction part of it, even if the result is not there. And then, in the method section and stuff like that, because those 2 are things that can be done prior. And then manuscript exchange deadline for pre-review. This is the CWIS pre-review with the other members, is the 20th of February. And then you have until March 5th to kind of work it out. Which is the submission that is due for JTAX. And then that is it for the authors. And then for the rest of CWIS members who are also reviewers, the next deadline will be April 9th for the JTEX review to be due, so that we can be ready for April 11th for the CWIS Summit. The reason for that is we want to make sure that all the reviews are done, because remember, it's blinded, it's double blinded. That we want all the reviews to be done without us knowing who are the authors. And that is, again, to assure no favoritism and stuff like that, and giving the best chance for your papers to be published. So that's the timeline. Any questions on the timeline? Cool. And then this is Dr. Mayberry's How to Write the Best Manuscript Ever webinar information. It's going to be October 4th, right, Sarah Ann, at 1400 Mountain Time? Perfect.
So Susan, your previous slide said how to write your best manuscript ever, but here it's titled how to write the best manuscript ever. Is there?
You know what? It could be both.
This is lofty. What's
it's
that?
Both. It's both your best ever and the best ever. So
it's the personal best and it's the best ever. So
Okay, very good.
High standard.
It's ambitious. I love it.
I mean, if it's the best ever, it has to be your personal best.
Absolutely. By default, if it's the best ever, it's also your personal best.
That's right. So that's all I have. So thank you for paying attention. And if you have any questions, I'll entertain any questions regarding this, you know, whatever concern, complaints, questions, you know, if you want any clarification on anything. I'm not the expert of this, obviously, but I just want to kind of like share some of this knowledge that I feel would be helpful, I think.
I have probably what's a stupid question, but I want to know what you think the best way to, first of all, thank you. That was an awesome talk. Second of all, what are your recommendations as far as keeping track of references and utilizing a reference system?
Yeah, so I'm an old school person, so I use EndNote, and not very successfully sometimes too, but I know there are other ones that are free online for that. If your paper is not, I mean, so that's the other thing. References. I think we kind of like shy away from the old school way of you have to reference the primary paper. By all means, if you lift an information from the introduction of a paper, then that's not the primary paper, right? Like you have to go back, but you do not actually have to list every single paper that found that, I feel. Because at the end of the day, I think most journals nowadays kind of tells you like maybe about 20 or 30 like references. Because if you really go back to the real like primary paper for all of them, there'll be hundreds in this day and age. So that's kind of, you know, I think another thing that is a little bit different than like the old school of doing things. I think in the like when I was writing papers in undergrad, that's like what I was taught, like primary paper, and then there are like hundreds of references. There's no need for that. 20, 30 references is pretty good.
Sounds like a great topic for another webinar, really, at some point.
Not for me, because I don't know how I should have done it very well.
Somebody else from the committee.
Someone else can do it.
Kartiko, I wanted to, Dr. White, you can jump in on this too, because I know the program committee perseverated a little bit about the peer process. And there was a lot of discussion about, or between the program committee, the publications committee, the executive committee, you know, there was just a lot of discussion about this peer review process. And the idea between, you know, we have so many talented researchers already in our group, so many people that are submitting really high quality work, and yet, you know, rejection rates, while they're lower when you're submitting to, you know, with our special edition, they're lower than if you're just submitting on your own. Still, you know, rejection rates are real, and that perhaps by, you know, using the knowledge of the group and the the talents and skills of our various group members, that we could all learn a little bit. But I'll be candid in saying there was definitely some pushback, and I think you both can speak to that as well. You know, that there were definitely some feathers ruffled by the, by the suggestion of this peer review process. And as two people that I know both have, valued and cherished mentoring relationships, maybe you could speak a little bit to the value that you feel like this will afford.
Yeah,
can
thank you
go ahead,
for
Susan.
bringing that up. Sorry, am I speaking over someone?
No, it was Tom. Go ahead.
Okay. I think that I think that came about because the manuscript that was submitted may not be, like I said before, like the conciseness, the typos, and sometimes like logic just jumps from like one, paragraph to another. There was a lot of kind of like, and I do this too when I write. There's a lot of, I know what I'm trying to say, but it was not translated well on paper. And so the sentence structures are not very good. There's like running sentences and stuff like that. I know that, many of us have published quite a bit, but I feel that this one in particular have a lot of those that can be remedied prior to submission. The problem is, it is the CWIS reviewers themselves who then turn around and reject the papers, right? So I don't want, what we want is that we don't want these kind of like not so clearly written manuscript to get rejected by the reviewer on the first go around, which happens to most of the manuscripts, to be honest with you. And eventually, and then, one says like major revision, the other one say reject. I push it all to major revision. But, that's thing of that rejection is not very, I guess a lot of the authors probably don't know, because the only people who knows that they are rejected is me. And the person who rejected the paper. But I don't want our reviewer to kind of be in that position, right? And then they're like, well, I rejected it and it came back around again. And so some people make comments like that, right? Like, they're like, oh, I rejected it, but I guess the editor thought it was better than I thought. And so here's my review, right? And so it just makes it very awkward for everybody for that. And to be honest with you, sometimes I read them and I'm like, I really don't understand completely what they're saying, but it seems like the methodology is sound enough. And that's why I push them to major, revision. And then eventually got accepted. And I think it's all because that the first go around, the sentences are not concise, they're not explaining well, they didn't master their message well. And so I think having a person coming in prior to that will help these papers to be their best possible version before it gets to the reviewer. And I know it's like redundant, a lot of things, but it just kind of because of what happened this past year, that makes it kind of like, okay, maybe we do need someone to kind of peer review prior to submission. Because the reviewers also, I'm not saying the reviewers are lovely. Everybody's doing what they're supposed to do and stuff like that. But I can tell that some of them are frustrated that they're reading a manuscript that is not the best that they could be before it reaches them.
Yes, can I make a comment or two? I think one thing.
Really quickly, I wanted to follow up on Dr. Kartiko's point. I think that's a very fair point. If you're a reviewer and you're giving a lot of feedback to someone that's not, that feels kind of elementary, or that feels like something they should have fixed in advance, I can see where that would be frustrating for a reviewer if it's something that seems like a chip shot, that was an easy thing to already have been fixed. That would frustrate me as a reviewer. And Dr. White, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
You woman-splained me.
Yes, I did. It was fair turnabout.
Yeah. No, I just did. Well, this is kind of an echo of what you guys said. So don't accuse me of mansplaining. I just have a little bit of different twist on it. I think one thing that we need to remember at the end of the day is that these peer reviews are voluntary. They're strongly encouraged, but they're not required. So if you have a manuscript and you've worked with your attending and you guys, it's boilerplate and you love it and you don't want somebody else to look at it, that's perfectly fine. That we're going to be okay with that. We just want to enhance the opportunity for a success. And one thing as a reviewer that I notice, if I get a manuscript on first review that's heavily burdened by bad grammar, poor sentence structure, the wrong tenses, bad spelling, and just sort of technical things in the writing part of it, I get bogged down in that when I try to review it. And I get to a point where, oh my God, there's so much wrong with this that it's going to take me weeks to be critical. And then my review suffers accordingly. So if we can just get these into the reviewer's hands, as Susan said very eloquently, with the best foot forward, it's going to make the review process easier for everybody and a lot easier and more friendly for the reviewers. And I think they're more likely to give you a positive spin, or at least look at your manuscript with a favorable eye instead of one that's, oh my gosh, this has so much wrong with it. It's gonna take forever to get it right, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
True.
I had one other comment, but I forgot.
Oh, okay. Well, is it about this or something else? Because I wanted to add one more thing to this.
It was this, but I'll think about it. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I seeded the question on this because I will say I confess that I was part of the impetus for this and really pushed for this. I know, for example, and I trained in a non-clinical environment, but in my schoolwork, there was a certain style that we, performed and practiced. And yet there were other programs that did it a different way. And when I met people who did it a different way, it wasn't that it was wrong, it was just different, right? And in the way that we published in academic publications, non-clinical. But when I saw the way other people wrote and published, and I was like, oh, interesting, different style, And it wasn't, that they just wrote differently than I did. And it wasn't bad, but it was different. And it was good for me once I kind of branched outside of my program to see other people's work. And I think that's part of why I pushed so hard. Candidly, why I pushed hard for this peer review process, because I feel like it's good. Many times our scientific abstract, the selected scientific abstracts for the summit are trainees, and they're working with their mentors in their program to write their manuscripts, right? And it's the same person that's helped them do the research. And so I think, they're working collaboratively. That's probably the same person that's training them how to write other publications. And so there's a certain style that's within that program. But I think by having an outside person give it eyes before it's going to JTAX and getting, scrutinized further, it's kind of nice to see, is this style something that's unique to this program, or is this something that maybe we need some outside thought on, and I think that can be really helpful to sometimes just have a fresh approach and decide, is this the best way we can explain this particular concept or idea? And I think I gained a lot in my academic publishing by being able to see other people's styles and other people seeing mine and giving me feedback. And so again, in a non-clinical setting, but still kind of a similar concept. And I hope, this is our first year doing it. I hope other people feel like it's a success, as Dr. White mentioned, and Dr. Kartiko as well. It is entirely voluntary. I hope that all of our selected, or all of our selected authors will choose to participate. But if not, certainly those that do, I think will have a good experience, because what we do have in CWIS in spades is very very proactive mentoring and coaching, and the opportunity to really get feedback from other people, or that I think people are very invested in that process and sharing. And hopefully, that's something that I feel like is unique to CWIS, that people are effusive with both praise and opportunities for professional growth. And hopefully we can share that through this process. I'm sorry, Dr. White, did you have another comment?
Oh, I just had one more question, and I should probably know the answer to this, but will the peer reviewer ever be one of the reviewers for that same manuscript, or will it be
Not
other
the
people?
same manuscript, but
Great.
they will be people who have done reviews with
Sure.
Dr. Kartiko's process.
No, I understand that, but
Yes, they will
If
be
Susan submits,
the level of JTAX reviewer, so they'll know what they would normally be looking for in a review, but they will specifically, so I will provide her a list of the people that we paired up. But they will then she'll make sure that she doesn't connect them on the back end of the database.
great, thank you.
Yep. But if you always, I mean, you're always welcome to go find your own peer reviewer. You know, if there's someone that you think, oh, this thought leader within CWIS, I want them to read my paper. You know, obviously we have such a cool network of people that are always interested and available to help. You are an email or a Slack message away from 800 others that would all love to review your work, I'm sure, and be gracious with their time. So I don't think that if you decide you want more than one person to review your work, or you want to anytime I think you're submitting something, it could be outside of the summit process. I think that's again one of the strengths of CWIS, that people are very gracious with their time from what I see, and I think they would be more than willing to take a look at their work. So we'll see where this peer review process goes for the first year. Hopefully it's a success.
I'm not sure I support this idea of people selecting their own peers. If that were the case, I probably won't get any, and Everett and Susan will get all of them. So you might want to rethink that.
That's probably true. Yes. Everyone will be flooding Dr. Kartiko's inbox, and she'll be an even busier human than she already is.
Great presentation, Susan. Thank you.
All right.
Well, I just want to echo my thanks. I know that Dr. Coimbra thinks so highly of the work that you're doing, and is just so grateful for all that you've been contributing. I was chatting with him recently, and he just could not say enough good things about the work that you're doing and the huge amount of effort it takes to get all of those reviews. So many reviews, so many papers this last year. We definitely had a lot of scientific presenters as part of the summit, and a lot of people submitted manuscripts, and it was a huge lift, and you did it with grace and poise, and hopefully it did not give too many moments of what was I thinking when I said yes, but
no, it's all good. I love it, and don't be encouraged, everybody. Like, don't be discouraged of like all the number of papers. Like, just submit, because we love good quality work. It's great. I love reading a really good paper. I actually got really excited about one of the review process and going back and forth, and it was in such a high level. I was like, oh my God, I wish I can publish the whole conversation that these people are having. It was amazing. And so it's a great learning process for me. I hope it's a great learning process for everyone, and continue doing research. You need more.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to share this information with our members. And thank you to all that joined today. We will definitely archive this, and it'll be posted to our website within the next probably 12 to 24 hours. You'll get an email that notifies you in case you want to share with your team members. And then, of course, as Dr. White mentioned in the chat, that way you'll have the opportunity to go back and rewatch it as you prepare manuscripts for the upcoming year. Just as Dr. Kartiko mentioned, I would just put in a plug that abstracts are due November 1st. So do not be late. And we will look forward to seeing you all at the summit in Salt Lake City, Utah, April 11 through 13, 2024. Yay.
Yay. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye, Sam. Bye, Tom.
Bye.
Bye.